this is Tubed Up. This is the second installment in my little tube amp mini series, and we're going to look at my main amp today. Now, in the world of tube amps, there are many different animals to be found, everything from vintage Fenders with little to no gain to modern rectifiers with 10 or 15 tubes to various hybrids and multiple channel amps with several different stacked gain modes and all kinds of stuff. In the case of this, the Soldano Hot Rod Avenger 100, well, this is pretty much as bare as you can strip an amp. One channel, no reverb, and the standard issue model doesn't even have an FX loop. And I think that might be why it's pretty much the best amp that I've ever played. Now, this is a great example of an amp that does one thing, but it does it so well it doesn't need anything else. This is basically the distilled overdrive channel of the classic SLO 100. It's that channel with everything else removed, so there's nothing to get in the way of that just pure tube sound. Now keep in mind, the more you put into an amp, if you use a lot of different stuff, things can kind of get in the way of each other. I mentioned in the last installment that I think the JVM 210 beats the 410 because the 410 has 4 channels in it, and because of that, I think it kind of has, all the channels have a little bit less room to breathe. In the case of this, it's just one channel, so everything, you know, it's just pure tubes and nothing else. Now, I've run across a few people, and you might be one of them, who are a little bit skeptical of a one-channel amp that doesn't even have a reverb in it. But some of those people I've let plug into this, and they change their tune fast. This just doesn't need anything else. The only thing I find strange is this. This amp has an FX loop, which I had to have. Obviously, this was custom-made, custom-ordered, and I had to put an FX loop in it because that's important. But the standard model does not have an FX loop, and this is the strange thing. When it has the FX loop, it's a Hot Rod Avenger 100. When it doesn't, it's just an Avenger 100. Now, this led to a little bit of confusion when buying one, since Soldano has the Avenger series and the Hot Rod series, and I don't know. And the weirdest thing is that on the back of this, it just says Soldano Avenger. The words Hot Rod are nowhere to be found on it. But whatever, what counts is how it sounds. But anyway, let's see what it can do. If you're new to Tubed Up, I recommend going back and watching the initial installment where I went over the Marshall JVM 210, since I covered some principles there that I'm not going to be recapping too much here. So if you haven't watched it, go ahead and do that now. Now, if you own an Avenger, that's how I'm going to be referring to this, a Hot Rod Avenger, or the Avenger with this or that, whatever. I'm just going to call it the Avenger if you own one, or hell, any Soldano amp, a Hot Rod series, an SLO, whatever you got, or any kind of similar amp, just plug straight into the front of it, no pedals, nothing, and if you own a power attenuator, you might want to use one, since this son of a bitch is loud. Now, if you don't know what a power attenuator is, I'm going to be going over it, and if you don't have one, just take some notes, and try it when you get one, because, well, if you got a tube amp like this, you're going to need one. And I said it last time, even if you are absolutely thrilled with the sound that you're getting from plugging your Line 6 pod straight into your FX return, just try some of the stuff that I'm going to tell you here. You may surprise yourself. Now, I'm going to have my power attenuator on most of the time here, because like I said, this son of a bitch is loud. And if I don't use it, I'm going to blow myself right out of my seat. This has a lot to do with reducing the volume, but keeping the sound in place. Now, if you haven't watched the previous installment, I suggest you do that now, and pay attention to what happens when I manipulate the volume of the amp. If you haven't watched it, go and do it now. I'll be right here waiting. Okay, you back? Cool. Now, remember how when I turned the volume back, the sound got a lot weaker, but when I turned it way up, the sound got more powerful and fuller? Well, that's what this has to do with. Like I said, that's caused by clipping in the power tubes, and that comes from heat, and heat comes from volume. The harder you drive them, the hotter they get. That's how you get that kind of sound. That's why we say it sounds warm or it sounds hot. It's literal heat that gives you that. The thing is, when you run your amp low, you don't get that. So you have to push your volume to get the best sound. The thing is, with an amp like this, that is a hell of a lot of volume, and I've got some pretty serious reduction on my attenuator here. Even if you're playing an arena show, your sound man is going to have a hard time controlling this kind of output, if he can control it at all. And if your sound man can't control it, your show's going to be a disaster. Well, that's where this lovely little piece of equipment comes in. This is called a Gibson Power Stealth. Let me give you a little bit of a better look at it here. And it looks like this. This is almost the exact same thing as the more commonly known THD hot plate. And if you own a tube amp, I would seriously recommend getting one of these. Now you can see here it's got 2 cords running out of the back. What's happening here is that the head, instead of being connected directly to the cabinet, the speaker out from the head goes into here, and then this goes to the input on the cabinet. And it's got 2 outputs on it, so you can run a full stack. And it's obviously run with speaker cables and not instrument cables. If you ever wondered why that was, because it's much higher voltage that comes out of the head than goes into the head. And speaker cables are basically the same as the cables that you use to plug your lamp into the wall. And here's a little tip for you. If you buy 1/4-inch jack ends, cut the cord off an old lamp or use an old extension cord, and you solder them on, then you got a speaker cable. Now, while there is a mild electrical signal that comes out of your guitar and goes into your amp, it's a much more powerful current that goes from the head into your cabinet. That's why your cabinets don't need their own power source. Well, what a power attenuator does, it takes that, at least this one, it takes that electrical current and does 3 things with it. There's a light on the front that you're going to see lighting up when I play. There is a heating coil inside of it, and there's a cooling fan that you can see on the bottom, and when you play, the fan actually spins the more you play. Now, that's a double-purpose system because what happens is when you play, the coils get hot and the fan cools them off. And what that's basically doing is taking the current that would normally push your cabinet and just siphoning it off and taking it elsewhere, so it's a weaker signal that goes into the cabinet. Now keep in mind, your speakers are just big magnets, so when you push a really strong current into them, they're going to vibrate really heavily, and that's going to give you a lot of volume. When you siphon some of that off, it's going to reduce the volume. This is the thing. This is siphoning the power that's going to the cabinet, not the head. The head is still running at its maximum output. So you're not changing, this doesn't change the sound that's coming from the head. It only changes how much of that sound gets to your cabinet. So you get all the benefits of turning your volume up without the uncontrollable volume and feedback and noise and everything else. Now you see on the front here, there's some switches and dials. The dials control the amount of dB reduction, and the switches kind of compensate for some minor loss of frequencies as you increase the reduction. Overall, it preserves the sound of the amp very well. Now, I usually just leave the bright and deep switches on most of the time, depending on what kind of cabinet I'm playing through. I don't always use this one. If I'm at a venue that has cabinets or something like that, I might switch them on or off and tweak the amp if I have to. But overall, it sounds great, and it doesn't interfere with the natural sound of the Soldano very much. Now, I could never play in a smaller venue with an amp like this because it would just be too loud. So in short, if you've got a tube amp, really a tube amp of any kind, you're going to need a power attenuator, so make sure you go out and get one. Now, like I said, someone who's new to tube amps or a novice player, one of the problems they may cite with tube amps is that they just don't have as much gain as a solid-state amp does. I think I've already proven otherwise in the previous installment, and I'm going to prove otherwise with this too, but the key ingredient is that power attenuator. But anyway, enough talk about that. Let's fire this motherfucker up in the next section here.